r/NoSleep, posted by Reddit user Spike Goddess. I run a museum of cursed objects. Let's talk about the crow. The last time I posted, someone expressed curiosity regarding the crow. Again, I must apologize for all the vague, unexplained rules. If I were to fully go through each one, well, I'm pretty sure my post would be banned immediately for the ridiculous length. I am more than happy to talk about the crow, though. I consider him my friend now, after all. Just to remind you, the rules about the crow reads as follows. You must be kind to the crow. You may offer him snacks, if you like. As with all of our rules, there are very solid reasons behind this one. Only one person I know of has failed to be kind to the crow, and it did not go super well for them. The crow is kind of a mystery around here. He just kind of showed up one day. The museum had only been open a month. Business was pretty slow, and Em and I were still struggling to make ends meet. We hadn't yet installed the barrier around the cursed bonnet, so that led to a heap of trouble, and I was honestly in way over my head. Em had accidentally touched the janitor. I have no idea what she feels when she touches Jan, what her sensitivity picks up from the man who looks so human, but clearly isn't quite. She's always refused to tell me. It's only happened a couple of times, but every time it does, she goes stark white, and her knees wobble. Her eyes fog over, like she sees something far away. On one occasion, she spaced out and wouldn't let go of Jan, and I had to physically pull her off of him. Needless to say, she needs plenty of bed rest after that happens. Anyway, that's why I was closing up alone last night. I was preoccupied, worried about Em. I forgot to lock the front door, or at least, I think I did. I thought I remembered locking it. Although you won't understand much of this, I'll walk you through my nightly routine, just so you understand that nothing was out of the ordinary for me. I checked the power of the UV light, killed the Tamagotchi, and flipped over the hourglass with a sapphire blue sand. I started my sweep of the main room, checking for trash, anything out of place that might offend anything in there. As expected, I began to hear soft whines and barks, yelps of distress. I jogged over to the cross. It's yellow and faded, and has "Good Boy" carved into it, traced by a chipped, aged red paint. Just as I do every night, I pulled the milk bone from my pocket, set it at the base of the cross, and said, "Sleep well, good boy." The vocalizations died down to a contented snoring. Just as the snoring started, though, there came a great squawk. That wasn't right, I thought. I turned around slowly, dreading finding whatever unholy thing that had spawned out of the black cabinet this time, and wondering how the hell I had forgotten to lock it up properly. To my surprise, the cabinet was tightly locked. I couldn't say the same for the front door. As I watched, it swished closed. My eyes searched frantically for the intruder, as my hand searched my hip for my pocket knife. Slowly, I looked down. There, at my feet, stood the crow. It was a decrepit old thing. Its feathers, black and sleek on most of its kind, were tattered and grayed, making a patchwork pattern against its skin where it stood out in small bald spots. It stared at me, unblinking, with its beady little eyes that didn't look quite right. The eyes of most crows are dark brown, nearly black. This bird's eyes were too light, too pale, almost silver. It stared and stared, and I stared back, my eyes beginning to water. Something inside me told me not to blink, and although I've never really worked with animals, I have enough experience with things that are not as they should be to obey that instinct unquestioningly. I held its eyes, and my eyes watered and stung. It did not cock its head to the side, as normal crows might, didn't fidget, didn't break the gaze that it fixed me with. After what felt like hours, The crow finally blinked, and I was released. I squeezed my eyes shut, gasping, and leaned over, put my hands on my knees and balanced there with difficulty. Now, like I said, animals are not my thing. I like them, sure, but I don't understand them. I knew a friend who'd worked with animals that were something more than ordinary, but she died in an accident with some sort of horse with human eyes a few years back, so that was a definite no-go. The crow, though, didn't seem to immediately want to harm me, so I was hopeful that I could deal with the situation on my own. Although I wasn't an expert on the subject, I was not a total idiot, and I knew when a most likely magical crow flies in one night and has a staring contest with you, you don't disrespect it. "It's nice to meet you," I said cordially as I could. The crow's eyes had not yet left mine, but it blinked again, and there was a general feeling of acknowledgement that vibrated through my skull. The crow regarded me for another long moment, and then turned away. It began to stroll around the museum, its talons clicking against the tile, its head swiveling to and from as it observed the exhibits. At each one, it took a moment, letting its two light eyes flit over the descriptive signs. Miraculously, it actually seemed to follow the rules listed there, which was a relief, because I wasn't sure how most of those objects would respond to a disobedient corvid. In a sort of stunned revere, I watched the crow give the bonnet a wide berth, which was how I knew it was a male. Cautiously, I continued closing down the museum. Occasionally the crow would give a demanding squawk, and I would walk over and see it glancing unexpectedly between me and an exhibit. Each time this happened, I gave a brief overview of the exhibit and explained its history, sometimes focusing on a particular subject when the crow jabbed its beak expertly at the specific part of the sign. I had ceased to be frightened of the crow, I found, when I went to bed that night. Em was feeling well enough to run the night shift, which I wouldn't have asked her to do except I'd run the night shift already, and, as such, had been up around 30 hours straight already. I informed her about the crow and told her I'd be sleeping in the office instead of the flat upstairs, and to grab me if she needed me. I was too tired to entertain the idea of trying to communicate with the crow through M. I left the door to the office cracked and drifted off to the sound of the crow clicking its talons on the floor. The crow became something of a museum regular after that, by which I mean that he had decided it was going to live with us in the Hall of the Cursed. He never slept, never ate, never drank. His unsettling eyes followed each and every visitor sharply. I tried offering him snacks, and he accepted most of them, rejecting only a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, by which he seemed incredibly offended. He never consumed these snacks, rather he grabbed them in his beak and flew up to the ceiling, where I assume he hid them in the rafter or crevice of some sort. I was worried that things might start to rot, but there hasn't been any smell, so he must be doing something with them. He got along quite well with me, but he didn't care for M. He would follow me around, and even took to perching on my shoulder as I went about my business tending to the museum. On one occasion, M attempted to touch him. As if sensing her spiritual sensitivity, the crow squawked and immediately flew off again, landing on the bald head of a rather unsettled visitor, and glaring darkly at me as if to say, "You would allow this invasion of my privacy?" After that, I urged M not to attempt to get too near the crow, and, being the smart woman she is, she agreed. It made me feel kind of awesome, actually, having the crow on my shoulder. Visitors looked at me in awe. I had never liked attention, but the sort you get from having a mystical crow perched on your side is the best sort there is. I asked them if he'd like a name. He gave me such a look of disgust that I never brought it up again. Other than some of those details, though, he seemed like a pretty normal crow. I occasionally doubted he was even, well, strange. Strange the way the things I work with are strange. One unkind visitor changed that. It was rainy. I remember that. Em was taking the night shift, so she was sleeping up in the flat, and I was tending to the museum alone. As usual, the crow was perched haughtily on my shoulder, occasionally taking off to peck at and very loudly reprimand visitors who were breaking the rules, which was quite handy, by the way. At one point, a dark-haired man, tall and burly but not exceptionally clean or well-shaven, had started to lean over the barrier towards the cursed bonnet, laughing at the little girl whose hand he was clutching as he did so. Her little blonde pigtails were practically quivering in terror, perhaps of the bonnet, but I barely had time to register that before the crow flew from my shoulder to snap at the man's offending hand with his beak. The man looked up, rage in his eyes, which were dark, dark brown. I rushed over, extending my hand on which the crow decided to land, albeit with a very judgmental look at me. "I'm sorry, sir, but my friend here was simply trying to make sure you had read the sign," I said politely, nodding my head towards the extremely obvious sign that I had seen the man read several minutes ago. "Ugh, that bird better screw off," growled the man. Instantly, I felt the crow's claws tighten slightly around my arm, and it contained a wince. "Sir, this bird is very well trained. I apologize for his methods. Please, respect the rules of the museum and we should all get along just fine." The man spit at my feet. For several long moments, I stared at the glob of saliva on the floor. The normally spotless beige tiles had been splattered. A couple of minute drops had landed on my shoe. Bile rose in my throat. Then, I felt the crow, and all thoughts of the saliva vanished. It was an energy of sort, coming off the crow in waves. It was the worst miasma I had ever felt at that time. Probably still the worst I've felt, if I'm honest. Strong, staggering. I could barely stand. I suspect I only remained standing because the crow willed that I did so. I couldn't turn my head to look at it, but I knew from the way the dark-haired man froze, as if gripped by an invisible force, that he had locked eyes with the crow. His face contorted in what I recognized as absolute terror. The crow held this position for what felt like an hour. Then, abruptly, the man was free. Both of us stood there, gasping, our knees wobbling. Beside the man, the little girl with pigtails had started to cry. "Come on," I said to the crow, turning my head. That was the exact moment I realized that the crow had pounced. In detached horror, I watched the crow lunge towards the man, wings outstretched and talons extended. The light from the windows dappled through its winged feathers, which were no longer gray, but a gorgeous, sleek black, and I had a bizarre feeling that it was like watching an avenging angel. Quick as a whip, the crow lashed out with his black beak. The next moment, he had returned to my shoulder and ducked his feathered head to preen his wing feathers. There was a heavy thud as the dark-haired man, blood spilling from his severed jugular, hit the floor, twitching. The little girl screamed and stumbled back. Everything but myself and the crow ceased to exist to me in that moment. I felt the weight of him on my shoulders, the pricking of his talons as they gently dug into my flesh. I floated into the abyss of dark energy that emanated from him. I did not turn to see him, but I could feel his eyes on me as he slowly turned his head to face me. His beak, still glossy where it had dipped into the man's bloodstream, whispered against my neck. I was abruptly aware of the blood pouring through my veins, of the beating of my heart. I was small, incredibly small, in the presence of whatever this being, this crow, was, and I was finally forced to be aware of the true difference between us. I knew then that this creature could snuff me out, easy as blowing out a candle. It simply hadn't felt like it yet. Right then, though, right then, it felt like it might. My throat constricted, and I felt one shameful tear slip from my eye. Then it was over. The museum existed again, and so did the dead man, and so did the wailing little girl, and so did the other museum patrons, who were screaming loudly enough to wake up M. She emerged from the stairs, that adorable curly brown hair flying absolutely everywhere. She raced over to the man and clamped her hands over his neck, although it had already ceased to splurt blood, ordering a patron with bright red hair to call 911. And me? I gasped, gulped in air as my lungs remembered how to work. On my shoulder, the crow nudged me with its beak. Vaguely, I felt wetness and knew it had smeared blood on my cheek. The crow fluttered over to the girl, who had collapsed on the floor, her body racked with now silent sobs. Embarrassed and hateful at my own inaction, I ran to her side and dropped down next to her. When I got close, I could hear what she was repeating, the words concealed in her tears, over and over again. "Help me. Please, help me." The police were very helpful, and I spent a half hour thoroughly cleaning the blood from the rather disgusting crow's beak. It shook itself slightly afterwards, and blinked purposefully at me, as if to thank me. I blinked back, and hoped it conveyed my thanks. Thanks for not killing me. Thanks for being a protector. Thanks for being a friend. What I had learned was that little girl had not been that man's daughter, nor his niece, nor his extremely youthful cousin. A little girl with blonde hair had been snatched from outside her home that same morning and was reported missing. Apparently, the dead victim of the crow had been suspected in child abductions before, but they'd never have evidence to pin him down. Not that it mattered anymore. Before the crying child was sent home with her also crying parents, she received a tiny peck on the cheek from the crow that looked far more like a kiss. She giggled and was pulled away, her shining eyes never leaving the crow. I don't know what that crow really is. I know he's probably not a corvid, no matter how smart they are. I've only felt him release his true energy once, and I never want to feel that again. That being said, I don't know if it matters. That man is the only person he ever hurt, up until now, and he's basically been an unpaid museum employee at this point. More than that, the crow is family now, even if he's still incredibly distrustful of M. I get the feeling that he's not super into psychics. He and I, though, we're partners in crime now. So please, be kind to the crow. And overall, we really encourage good behavior in the Hall of the Cursed. Remember to mind your attitude, and you will be fine.